Hey everyone, have you ever thought about this? What happens when music stops being just for dancing and starts being for listening? Well, that's exactly the story of modern jazz. We're about to go on this wild ride through decades of musical revolution, meet some genius artists, and hear sounds that literally changed everything.
Yeah, that one question is pretty much the key to this whole thing. See, for the longest time, jazz was music you danced to. It was fun, it was swinging. But then, around the 1940s, a bunch of new musicians came along and started asking, hey, what if we made music that you really listen to? Something as deep and complex as, say, a classical symphony. And, well, the answer to that question? That's modern jazz. So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll see how this new sound was born. Then we'll dive into bebop, the first big, crazy revolution. After that, we'll look at how jazz split into two different moods, cool versus hard bop. Then things get really wild, as musicians start breaking all the rules. And finally, we'll check out what's happening with jazz right now. Sound good? Let's go.
Okay, so let's jump in our time machine and head back to the early 1940s. Picture it. The most popular music everywhere is swing. You've got these huge big bands playing in giant ballrooms. It's awesome, but for some of the musicians playing in those bands, it was getting a little boring. Night after night, playing the exact same arrangements. They were itching for something more, you know? They wanted the freedom to really express themselves.
And so what did they do? They left the giant ballrooms behind. Instead, they started playing in these small, smoky, intimate clubs, especially in places like New York City. And the whole point changed. It wasn't about getting a huge crowd to dance anymore. The new goal was to make you, the listener, lean in close and really hear what was happening. This is the moment jazz became art you think about, not just something you move to.
And you know what's crazy? This all happened so fast. I mean, we're talking about a massive change every single decade. You've got the super fast revolution in the 40s, then a complete split in the 50s, rule breaking in the 60s, and electric experiments in the 70s. Jazz just kept reinventing itself over and over. So let's get into that first big explosion, the one that started it all.
Right, so the first style of this new modern jazz was called bebop. And for a lot of people, it was a total shock. It was built around one single powerful idea that would define jazz from that moment on: improvisation.
Okay, so what is improvisation? Simply put, it's making up music on the spot. But, and this is super important, it's not just random notes. The best way to get it is to think of it like speaking a language. You don't just memorize sentences, right? You learn words, you learn grammar, and then you can have a real spontaneous conversation. In music, the words and grammar are things like scales and chords. Once you know them, you can talk to the other musicians with your instruments. So here's the typical game plan for a jazz tune. Step 1. The whole band plays the main melody together. This is called the head. Simple enough. Step 2. This is where the magic happens. Each musician gets a turn to take a solo. They're making up a brand new melody right there in the moment that fits over the song's chords. And step 3, after everyone's had their moment to shine, the band comes back together and plays the head one more time to wrap it all up.
And bebop? Oh man. Bebop took this whole idea and cranked it up to 11. We're talking super fast. The melodies were really complex and full of surprising twists and turns. You had to be an incredible musician to play it. Honestly, to a lot of people just listening, it sounded kind of chaotic. But for the players, it was pure freedom. The ultimate way to show what they could do.
So after all that high-energy intensity of bebop, some musicians in the 1950s were like, okay, let's take a breath. They thought it was time for something new, and this is really interesting. It caused a split. Jazz basically went in two completely opposite directions at the very same time. It's like a tale of two sounds.
So, in one corner, you had cool jazz, and it was exactly what it sounds like. It was a direct reaction against all that fiery, frantic energy of bebop. This music was way more relaxed, more chilled out. It was all about beautiful, flowing melodies and really well-thought-out arrangements. They even started using instruments you might hear in a classical orchestra, like a flute or a French horn.
But in the other corner, you had a whole other group of musicians who thought cool jazz was, well, maybe a little too cool, a little too relaxed. So they created hard bop. And this was all about bringing that energy back. It had a powerful, driving beat, and it was really connected to its African-American roots. You can hear the soulfulness of blues music and the energy of gospel music all mixed in to create these super catchy, high-energy songs.
Okay, so by the end of the 50s, you've got these two camps, but both of them still follow some pretty complex rules about how chords and rhythms work. But then, a new generation came along and started asking a really dangerous question. What if we just got rid of the rules? And the answers they came up with were about to push jazz to its absolute edge. The first step in breaking the rules was something called modal jazz. Here's a good way to think about it. If playing bebop was like trying to navigate a really complicated obstacle course, then modal jazz was like being set free in a giant, wide-open field. The musicians basically simplified the background chords, which gave the soloist way more freedom and space to just explore melody and emotion without having to worry about so many changes.
And this new freedom was incredible. It opened up so many doors. But for some musicians, even that felt like too much of a restriction. They wanted to go even further. They wanted to be completely 100% free.
And that brings us to free jazz. This was the most radical idea yet. I mean, they threw out everything. No more steady beat. No more pre-planned chords. No more verse-chorus song structure. The only and only goal was total, unfiltered creative expression. Just a raw, spontaneous musical conversation happening right then and there.
Okay, so just when you think jazz can't possibly get any more out there, bam! It collides with the biggest music on the planet at the time, rock and roll. Suddenly, jazz musicians are plugging in electric guitars, loud electric basses, and crazy synthesizers. They started using the heavy, funky grooves from rock music, and all of this mashed together to create this powerful electric style called jazz fusion. And this stuff was popular enough to fill giant stadiums.
All right, so after all that, all those revolutions and changes, where does that leave jazz today? Did it just stop? No way, not even close. Jazz is still very much a living, breathing thing. It's constantly evolving, constantly finding new voices and new sounds.
One of the coolest things is that jazz isn't just an American music anymore. It's become a global language. You've got musicians all over the planet, in South America, in Europe, in Asia, and they're taking the fundamental ideas of jazz, improvisation and freedom, and they're mixing them with their own local music and traditions. The result is just these amazing, brand new sounds. And that evolution is still happening right now. Today's artists are completely fearless. They're mixing jazz with the sounds of hip-hop, with the rhythms of electronic music, and even with the hooks of pop music. It just goes to show you that the core spirit of jazz, that creativity and spontaneity, can connect with pretty much anything.
So here's the main takeaway, the most important thing to remember. The sound of jazz has changed like crazy over the last 80+ years. I mean, it went from a tiny club in New York City to a global stage. But the heart of jazz, that has never changed. It has always been about those three big ideas: improvisation, individual expression, and creative freedom. And that kind of leaves us with one last big question to think about. Jazz has always been like a mirror, right? It reflects the times. So as our world keeps changing so fast, with all this new technology and all these new ideas, what do you think is next? What do you think the next sound of jazz is going to be?